If you've ever been to Berlin or have an interest in the Nazi regime in World War II, you might recognize this square. Bebelplatz, formerly known as Opernplatz, located on Unter den Linden between an opera, the Humboldt Law Library, and Humboldt University, was the location of one of Berlin's most infamous book burnings. On May 10, 1933, the Nationalist German Student Association dragged around 20,000 books from the library and university buildings, burning them as members of the Nazi Students' League, Hitler Youth, and other citizens watched. On that day, they burned the works of Heinrich Mann, Karl Marx, Albert Einstein, and many other authors. But what is unknown to some is that the first books to be thrown into the square, the books that sat on the bottom of the pile waiting to be burned, were this man's. Magnus Hirschfeld. Today we will be looking at this man and his work at the Institute of Sexual Research, as he was a leader in the movement before there even was a true movement. I'm Alexis Arrington, and welcome to Everyone's Gay, a look into queer history. Magnus Hirschfeld was born in a small town in what is now Poland, to an Ashkenazi Jewish family and the son of a highly regarded medical officer. He studied philosophy and medicine, and in 1982 earned his doctoral degree. After receiving his degree, he traveled through the United States for 8 months, where he visited the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. During his stay in Chicago, Hirschfeld became involved with the homosexual subculture of the city, and was struck by the similarities between Chicago and Berlin. He developed this theory on universality of homosexuality, which led him to do research on gay subcultures in many different countries around the world. Before living, Hirschfeld studied naturopathic medicines and found that many of his patients had attempted to or had taken their own lives because of their sexuality, leading him to become more involved with his own personal research and take an interest in gay rights. Hirschfeld moved to Berlin in 1896, and at this time Berlin was a vibrant and open city. At the time, Germany was ruled by Prussian Emperor Wilhelm II, and while the country had recriminalized homosexual acts in 1871, it was moving in a more progressive route. After World War I and the dissolving of the Prussian Empire, the Weimar Republic was instated. During this time in German history, and specifically Berlin history, it became known as a breeding place for intellect, art, innovation, and lots of dancing. And while still technically illegal, homosexuality flourished as a new tolerance began to grow. And Berlin became a destination for thrill-seeking tourists, people looking to break out of the constricting societies of other European countries, and those looking to explore the homosexual and transvestite venues and subcultures of the time. So Hirschfeld's personal connection to the patients he was treating, along with his own sexuality, and the political and social climate of Berlin, allowed him to really start focusing on his research. And in 1919, he opened the Institute of Sex Research with Arthur Kronfeld, a famous psychotherapist. As well as being a research library and housing archives, the Institute also had divisions of medical, psychological, and ethnological care, as well as marriage and sex counseling offices. In addition to these services, the Institute advocated for sex education, contraception, treatment for sexually transmitted diseases, and women's emancipation. For those who cannot afford treatments, the services were offered for free, ensuring that anyone who visited the Institute would receive the help they needed. It was visited by around 20,000 people each year, conducting around 1,800 consultations, as people traveled from all over Europe to gain a clearer understanding of sexuality. Hirschfeld's Institute became known by many scientists of sexuality at the time, providing important research and scientific data, along with informing political and social reformers. While the Institute was a leading voice in homosexual science and rights, It also was the first strong voice in the scientific study of the transgender community, with Hirschfeld coining the term transsexualism. Many transgender people were on staff of the Institute, as well as being clients and receiving various surgical services that were offered, including the first modern sex reassignment surgeries. But it is in the early part of 1930 that our story starts to take a more depressing turn, as the Nazi Party began to gain control of the German Reichstag. Hirschfeld saw this shift and predicted that there would be no future for people like him, both Jewish and gay, nor for his institute in Germany. And therefore he began traveling to find a new home for his institute. In November of 1930, he arrived in New York and began a speaking tour about sex in order to see if it was possible for him to settle in the United States. While speaking in Germany, he called for the legalization of homosexuality, seeing it as a possibility before the 1930s. But in the United States, he did not mention the subject of homosexuality, knowing that the American public was not ready to accept the community. And instead, he attempted to persuade them to be more open-minded about heterosexual sex, in hopes that he could later educate the public. Aware of the strong xenophobia tendencies in the United States, where foreigners seen as troublemakers were unwelcome, he tailored his message to the American taste. But he recognized that America was still not ready to become home for his institution. So he continued traveling around the world to Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and eventually back to Europe, desperate to find a new home. On January 30th, 1933, Hirschfeld's prediction came true, as President Paul von Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor. Less than 4 months later, while Hirschfeld was still on his book tour, on the morning of May 6th, the Institute was sacked by a group of university students belonging to the National Socialist Student League. They shouted, "Burn Hirschfeld," as they beat up the Institute's staff and smashed the premises. Eventually, they burned the building to the ground, killing many who were still inside. Before they burned the building, they removed all of Hirschfeld's books, research, and studies from the library, storing them for the book burning that would take place later in Opernplatz. By the time of the book burning, Hirschfeld had long left Germany on the speaking tour and knew that he would never be able to return. He moved to Switzerland for a bit, where he wrote his book Men and Women, The World Journey of a Sexologist. Then he moved to France, where he stayed continuing his research, writing, campaigning, and working to establish a French successor to his lost institute in Berlin. It was in France that he wrote his book Racism, published after his death, which explores the theories underlying a racial war, and spoke on the ideas of a civilized race and white supremacy that he saw in Nazi Germany at the time. His last book to be published was The Human Spirit and Love, Sexological Psychology, in 1935. On May 14, 1935, Hirschfeld died of a heart attack in his apartment in Nice. While Hirschfeld's story met a sad end, like so many Jewish and gay people during this time, his legacy lives on, as he has influenced many LGBTQ leaders and activists to further the community and his studies. In 2011, after several organizations devoted to continuing the memory and essence of Hirschfeld and his work, the Federal Cabinet of Germany granted 10 million euros to establish the Magnus Hirschfeld National Foundation to support research and education about the life and work of Magnus Hirschfeld, the Nazi persecution of homosexuals, German LGBT culture and community, and ways to counteract prejudice against LGBT people in Germany. For more information on Magnus Hirschfeld, I recommend the book Gay Berlin, Birthplace of Modern Identity by Robert Beachy. He speaks on how Berlin became the undisputed gay capital of the world and talks in depth about Hirschfeld's Institute of Sex Research, along with the first sex reassignment surgeries that occurred there. While it is in German, I also recommend to go to the website of the Magnus Hirschfeld National Foundation. Don't worry, Google will translate it for you, but it's a great resource. Next week, I will continue the conversation of gay Berlin and the Weimar Republic by looking at the life and work of Christopher Isherwood, an English writer who became a popular resident of the homosexual culture in Berlin, and is said to have come to Berlin for the boys. His work is well known, and one of his stories became the basis of the play Cabaret. I'm Alexis Arrington, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you like what you saw, make sure to hit that like button below and subscribe. Still not sure? Well, here's a cute puppy.